This is Unforgettable Learning, where we talk to L&D visionaries, experts and mavericks about performance, creativity and tech. Subscribe to stay in touch. Around 1.6 million people learn to drive each year, combining theoretical and practical tests. In fact, the UK driving test is the largest computer-based test in the world. However, since 2007, the rate at which people pass their theory test has dropped from 65% to just 44% in 2022, partly impacted by COVID. Today, we are really privileged to have Lisa Daniels from TSO, the official publisher for the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency, the DVSA, to tell us how they've tackled this head-on. Lisa, welcome.
Hiya, good to meet you.
It's absolutely lovely to have you on the Unforgettable Learning podcast. We are so excited to talk about your project. And I wondered if you could first begin by just telling us, the relationship between the DVSA and the TSO.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me, first of all. TSO, some people will have heard of us, some perhaps not. So TSO stands for the Stationery Office, and we are publishers, and we turn authoritative content and data into outstanding performance. We've got a lot of big publishing contracts, and the one that I work on is with the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency. So now I'll call them DVSA, but that's who they are, the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency. So we're their official publishing partner, and for them what that means is that we publish information in lots of different formats in the way that people want to receive it to actually create good outcomes for themselves and also their employers and employees. So that means publishing things like the highway code in book and app formats, also the theory test content in an awful lot of different formats depending on how people want to use it. And with Sponge, we created an e-learning platform and website called the Safe Driving for Life website, and that's where people can come find out all about learning to drive or ride, whether they be a learner or a parent of a learner, or whether they want to be a professional driver or rider and take it to that next level. So there's tons of information on the site, and then a really important part of that is the learning platform that we created with Sponge. And we've created a catalogue of e-learning modules, the most popular one being for the car theory test, which, as you said, is the learning and the revision platform for the largest computer-based test in the world, the theory test.
Brilliant. Well, I'm glad you, I feel like I stole your thunder a little bit by putting that fact into our intro, because you told me that so what is it? It's the UK's largest computer-based test, or in the world. It is that's true.
Great Britain, rather than UK, Great Britain. But it is the largest computer-based test in the world. So the most people in the world go and take that test on a computer, and they go along to a test centre close to them and do that. But what TSO does is to provide the official learning content, so people can make sure that they're fully prepared before they go and take their test.
So, full disclosure, I can remember doing this when I was 17. And what was so weird is, this was pre-e-learning, pre-mobile phones. And I remember having to go into town and go through a dusty old big door and up some stairs and sit in a room, and there were boxy computers and take a test. This was a while ago. Is it still the case now that people have to do that?
It is fairly similar to that, absolutely. Yeah, there are test centres dotted all around the country. Some of them provided by a company called Reed, and some of them provided by a company called Pearson. And you do go and sit in front of a monitor, and you take the theory test, which is in two parts. The first part being the multiple choice part, and the second part being the hazard perception part. Multiple choice part is just as described. You choose one correct answer from four, hopefully correct, from four. And the hazard perception part is where you watch a series of short videos and you click on a mouse where you see a developing hazard, something that might cause you to stop or change direction, that kind of thing. And we provide the e-learning for both parts of the theory test.
Great. So what was the kind of need then that drove you towards looking for a different type of web-based solution for practicing for this theory test? What were you looking for?
Yeah, TSO has been the official publisher for the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency for over 3 decades. And as you started to describe there, the actual process has changed quite a lot, where the theory test has been introduced, and the way that people learn and the way that people want to ingest that information and to create successful outcomes for themselves has changed as well. So we knew that we wanted to create a really great learning experience for people, something that really embedded the driving theory and really linked it to their practical driving lessons as well. There's lots of providers out there that provide a simple sort of question and answer type products, but what we wanted to do was something bigger, something more holistic, something that really linked the experience of the driving theory and the actual practical elements of driving. So pupils could actually discuss it with their instructor. They're seeing hints and tips, and it's really bringing the learning experience to life rather than it just being a hurdle in a learning process. Oh, I've passed the theory test, on to the next bit. It actually links the whole experience together, and that is a more successful way to produce safer drivers and riders.
And I guess just sort of dwelling in this problem space a bit more, because one of the things I really like about this project especially is really remarkable, is how well you understood your audience and what you learned about them that fed into your design thinking. I think oftentimes with, we can dash to the solution and actually understand. I think all the answers are with our audience, and learning about behaviours and kind of what they're currently doing and what challenges they face. Can you tell us, just share what you knew about your audience and that sort of fed into your thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. The majority of people who are coming to learn to drive, they still are really young people, although the average age of people learning to drive is gradually getting a little bit older because of things like cost constraints and that kind of thing. But yeah, typically people are between 17 and 24. They've got lots and lots of conflicting priorities on their time. They may be revising for A-levels or college or fitting in a busy social life. There may be pressures around learning to drive and getting their license that might sit around employability and getting a job, being mobile, getting away, going to university, and just becoming independent of that really important part of their life and not having to rely so much on adult family members to drop them places. So yeah, it's often quite a complicated sort of structure, or there's lots of reasons why people want to do it. But typically it's to gain their freedom and independence. And it's really trying to tap into those sort of aspirational desires to try and make people want to be successful and pass this and realise why it's important to pass it and be safe. It's not necessarily like any other exam that they'll go and sit in an a primarily educational environment where it's a pass, tick, move on to the next thing. This is something that'll stay with people for life. And that's why I was really excited to talk to you guys today, because it's something that touches everybody's life. And at different points in your life, you'll sort of revisit it. Perhaps if you have a child and you're putting your child in a car seat, or perhaps when you have children who get to the learning to drive age, you suddenly think, oh, am I up to date? Do I know what rules have changed? Do I know what's happening in the driving test nowadays? So it's something that everybody can relate to. And the technology, of course, is always changing as well. So typically now we find that while some people still really like to learn from books and enjoy that experience of turning the pages and taking the information on visually, we find that more often people really love to actually learn on the devices that they're used to holding in their hands, which of course is a mobile phone more often than not. Yeah.
Brilliant. Josh, I want to invite you in on this too. Can you remember learning to drive?
I was about to chime in with that, because Kate and I are obsessed with, well, not only obviously with the idea of unforgettable learning, hence the idea of this podcast, but just the idea of the learning experiences that we, almost all of us, go through in life, learning to ride a bike. And I would say a lot of us, learn to drive, to take that test. And I still remember on my 16th birthday going and taking that thing, and how proud I was of finding it's a moment of freedom. It's a moment of all those things. But I also think about the role of motivation in all of this, because I would say to your answer, Lisa, to Kate's question of, has this test changed so much? Well, no, not so much. It's amazing what you can get away with the right motivation. And and when I think about certainly our experience, which is predominantly in the corporate context, where we're thinking about employees in the workforce and rising expectations there, I also think about rising expectations for even as something as simple, quote unquote, simple as the driver's examination, where we've got a pretty high bar for what we can tolerate because we know what's on the other end of it. Is I get my freedom. I can finally, I don't have my parents to drop me off here, do something like that. But it just made me think of the role of motivation in learning, and even how motivation still has a threshold for expectations, certainly with the same generation that is used to consuming things on their mobile phone is also used to a digital experience of a certain flair, certain finesse, and to your point of holistic learning outcomes, getting the full story. It really matters. It really matters, especially when you think of this as this one moment in your driver journey of, I have to get the right learning story for you, because this is a real life skill you're going to apply tomorrow. And we all have a shared investment in it for you to get that right.
Correct, yeah. And there's so many different sort of personality traits involved as well. Typically, you might find that the young male drivers are a bit more, they take a few more risks. And you might find that that other people might really suffer from anxiety when they go to the test centre, or when they're sitting in the car with a driving instructor. And we have found that is something that has changed since the pandemic as well. We do find that we are trying to cater more and provide more support to help people with anxiety and nerves, because that is more often than not a really big problem nowadays. So on the website, as well as the e-learning platform, we also provide lots of advice and a really popular blog as well, where we deal with topical things such as dealing with nerves and anxiety. But yeah, there's a lot of different motivations and lots of different sort of learning styles and personality traits involved as well. Perhaps just worth touching on the fact that not only do the e-learning modules cater for people who are learning to drive, but we also have modules for professional drivers and riders as well. So people who are learning or are continuing to develop their career as a lorry driver or a bus driver. And we found that those were really significant and important as well. Again, during the pandemic, when there was a shortage in haulage drivers, and we really saw how that infrastructure challenge affected everybody in the whole country. So it was really important that we had e-learning modules in place so people could very quickly, if they chose to, enter that career and make a difference to how the country's wheels literally turned.
I really love this connection between learning and then just real world practical enablement. And it just, sometimes we can get a bit disconnected from the sort of materials that need to be learned and the questions that need to be revised. I'm not in this project per se, but that we can have this sort of content emphasis if we end up creating experiences that include tests and quizzes and scenarios, and keeping a really clear eye on what is it that we're enabling? What is it? Who are we empowering? What livelihoods are we enabling through this? Is a really lovely part to this project, and it's hugely relatable, as you said at the beginning, Lisa. We can all kind of remember or think about the idea of driving. It's kind of pervasive, and when you were sort of before you'd started creating anything, I'm really curious about what you hoped you would end up with. What did good look like? And also, I guess, what would have happened if you'd have done nothing, if you hadn't have done this intervention? What would have happened?
Of course, yeah. I think important context here is that we were already the official provider for the learning materials for the theory test. So there was already a great sort of starting point there. But what we wanted to do was really cement that relationship between the driving theory and the practical driving as well, and encourage encourage a learning experience where the learner driver is talking to their driving instructor. In fact, we've actually created an environment where a learner driver can share their learning record with their driving instructor. So the driving instructor can see how they are doing revising for their theory. They can look at the different topics that are assessed during the driving theory test, see which areas are perhaps a little weaker, which areas the student is doing better on, and they can actually talk about that in their driving lessons, and they can concentrate on elements where perhaps there's a deficit. So we wanted to create that environment where if somebody wanted to learn on their own and for it to be quite a private experience, they could do it that way. But if somebody was learning and wanted to share that experience with their driving instructor, or if they're learning in a group as well. So, for example, we've actually created a learning platform whereby big groups of students, such as the MOD, are actually using this learning platform for their learning, and they're churning through tens upon tens of people a week through the driving theory. So we actually had to create an experience which worked for quite a lot of different user groups. So you've got a normal, a member of the general public who may want to take a few months to actually revise really thoroughly and make sure they pass first time. Whereas in the MOD environments, we're actually creating something where they actually start and finish their driving theory test in a week. So we had to create something that was really, really effective, however somebody was learning, singularly or in a group environment as well.
And just to understand the need, why are the MOD doing this in a group? What's their use case?
Yeah, so the MOD take people in who perhaps haven't even learnt to drive yet. So young people enter the army, and they need to learn to drive a car, pass their car theory test before they perhaps go on to learn to drive a tank. Exactly, you've got it. And so it's actually part of their job.
Different type of driving.
I do feel like I've missed out now. I really have FOMO. I want to get my tank license big time.
I want a tank license.
Me too.
Sorry, Lisa, I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's cool. We have lots of other group learning environments as well, and that sort of has got my brain thinking about some of the other groups that we support. So we actually have organisations that run groups, theory test revision groups for refugees, and they're using our e-learning platform. We also have people who are learning when English isn't their first language, and they go to a centre. They go to a centre where they actually get additional language support. And so the learning platform that we've created, caters for all of these different environments and the additional support that people need, particularly for some tricky language terms, for example, that people might not be used to in their normal lives. So it's really good to get those to give people hints and tips and sort of almost like definitions on certain words or glossary terms, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, let me tell you, Lisa, if you haven't picked up yet on my accent, but it took me about 10 years to figure out what a lorry actually was, because that's not a phrase that makes it over the ocean. So language barriers, despite your fluency, is certainly something that can be an obstacle. But I just wanted to pick up on something that really kind of gives me the warm fuzzies in hearing you speak about it, because it's something that we oftentimes take for granted in how we do proper learning design, and that's empathy. And it feels like this thing that's kind of a nice to have sometimes. But the way that you speak about it and the way that you're quite honestly selling it to me is you really show how critical it is as an ingredient to actually develop effective learning experiences, whether it's about taking the various different groups that you have and empathizing with what their sometimes week is like, or sometimes 6 months is like, or even just helping people understand that let's make you comfortable on your journey of learning, sharing what you've learned. Because we do know in the moment test taking produces a ton of anxiety, creating space for people who have anxiety, that separating out the skill of being a good driver from taking a test. Those are two different skills altogether.
Absolutely, yeah.
So just a credit to you and your team for just how you approach the learner, something that we value very much over here at Sponge as well too, and sort of the dividends it pays when you actually take the care to understand who they are, rather than the temptation to think of the learner as this monolithic figure of like the average person, which is such a very dangerous term to put into place. So just a credit to you guys for really putting empathy at the center of the experience.
Thank you. And I think part of the important work that we've done with Sponge was actually creating a measure of test readiness for every single individual who's using the platform. So in that, we measure things like the coverage, how many questions of the whole question set you've done, how recently you've done them. And it also brings in learning science and things like the forgetting curve as well, so that the user, the individual, can know they're building up that test readiness score, which means that they know when they're ready to book their test, they know that when they're ready to pass their test, so that they are it obviously costs some money to go and take the test, so you want to make sure that you're ready and you're using that slot really wisely. So I think that's one of the things that we do, and we took care to produce a calculation that really gives people that information that they need. Are they test ready? Are they fully prepared? And we found that really, really works. And we've been running a survey very recently with our users, and fantastically, we're finding feedback that people who are using the e-learning platform, and we actually give people the option of how long that they want to revise for, whether they want to buy access for 30 days or 90 days or 365 days. And again, that speaks to whether somebody is just learning as a learner car driver, or whether they're learning as a professional to become a driving instructor or to become a lorry driver. And often their learning experience might be a bit longer if it's for a professional outcome. But yeah, we're finding that actually 90% of people who are using our e-learning platform are passing their tests first time, which is way above the national average, and is really showing that together with Sponge, we're getting it right.
That's amazing. And so, the work that you've done in understanding those audiences and their different needs and having empathy for them is really, really paying dividends. We're going to come back in our second half and talk a bit more about the solution in detail. You've given us some hints as to what's in that solution. But just before we close this part of the episode, tell us, is there anything that you wish you'd known before you started this project?
Well, we obviously didn't know there was a pandemic around the corner. And we couldn't have foreseen the fact that people wouldn't be allowed to actually take driving lessons. Only people who are critical workers were actually able to have driving lessons and do driving tests. So we absolutely couldn't have predicted that. And also, I think some of the ripple effect and the knock-on effect with people's reactions to anxiety and nerves, I think that is something that we hadn't foreseen either. We didn't realise that would be such an important factor. They've always been at play. People always get nervous about things like that, but that really has been something that we've needed to find tools and advice and help and support for people to help overcome those and just focus in on getting that pass. So I wish we'd have known those things beforehand, but obviously it was completely impossible to. And I think the fact that actually, while the pandemic was happening and we only had critical workers doing the theory test, the pass rate actually jumped up. I suppose it's because people were doing something that was absolutely critical. The people were really taking it seriously. So the pass rate did go really high during the theory test for those small number of people who are actually going to go through. I think one other thing as well is the actual driving test waiting times and theory test waiting times. The pandemic created a real backlog there, and DVSA have worked incredibly hard to make loads more test slots available and to get those driving tests and theory test waiting times right down. But I think where we've really been able to help is working with DVSA to make sure people are really ready to pass when they go for their test, and they're not just winging it, or they're not just doing last minute revision using a lightweight learning solution, let's say. So what we provide is really full learning for people who are taking it seriously, and people can see when they're ready to take their test. And we support DVSA in their Ready to Pass campaign to make sure that people are ready.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Well, look, I think we've got, to the depth of the need, and thank you for sharing all of that. I'm sure you, like many other people, would have enjoyed a crystal ball that could have told us when a pandemic was around the corner. But we're going to join you again in our next episode to tell us a little bit more about the solution. Lisa, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode. Subscribe to stay up to date with leading lights from L&D and leave us a review to let us know what you think.